points.
Hello again, good to have you with us. Nigel Ogden here with this week's edition of The Organist Entertains, or perhaps I should say on this occasion, the organist and other assorted keyboard players. Now, the idea for tonight's programme stemmed from... Primarily, The Organist Entertains is theatre organ based, but of course we do include tracks of Hammond organs and church cathedral organs as well. I divide listeners to the programme into two camps, really. Those who are the avid enthusiast and who probably belong to the various societies, preservation societies. And, I mean, they are fanatical about the instrument, about the music that's played on it. But then there's the other camp, the people that I always aim my personal concerts to, and that is the general public. I'm passionate about getting people off the streets into whatever venue to hear music being played on the theatre organ.
There we go, you're in the stall, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Penistone Paramount for this, our regular organ concert here, of course, featuring the sound and sight of the mighty Compton organ. And especially those of you, I know, that regular listeners to BBC Radio 2 will find this gentleman no stranger whatsoever, because for many years he's been the presenter of that superb programme, The Organist Entertains. So would you please give a big warm welcome to the entertaining organist himself, Nigel Ogden.
Thank you.
This particular organ was built in 1937 by the John Compton Organ Company in London. When I was looking around to buy a cinema organ, I played half a dozen or so and tried different instruments. None of them produced the right kind of sound that I was looking for, and basically fell in love with this instrument within the first few minutes of seeing it. Being a 21-year-old student at the time, I'd saved my life savings and bought the instrument. Of course, that's just the tip of the iceberg. It then becomes down to the maintenance of it, etc. And the only way to do that, or that I could afford at the time, was actually to learn the art of organ building.
There is a big difference, of course, between church organ music and music played on the theatre organ. This is the sort of typical theatre organ noise that everybody would associate with the instrument, I think. But it can also be a fantastic cathedral organ as well. Listen to this. The music played on the theatre organ was the light music of the era, adapted by the organist and played on an instrument which differs from a church organ, of course, in as much as, although it's still a pipe organ, so it has all the air going through the pipes, but it has a lot of things that you would never expect to find on a church organ, like glockenspiels and xylophones and drums and cymbals and all the real things as well, of course, not synthesised, but you've got real glockenspiels and xylophones, and so they're much more orchestral instruments and able to play popular music. Full marching band at your fingertips, isn't that fantastic? I think the great appeal of the programme is music played on the organ. I often think of whenever anybody wanders into a church or a cathedral and the organ's playing, people always stop and say, oh, listen to that. And, you know, people do love the sound of the instrument, be it playing classical music or light music. Obviously, the Organist Entertains, being on Radio 2, is light music based. Quite a few members of my family hail from Blackpool, and so trips to Blackpool were regular. I can remember the first time I ever went into the Tower Ballroom. It was in the days when Reginald Dixon, who of course was organist there for 40 years, was still doing his live half-hour broadcasts, and I would be about 5-6 years old. And at a few minutes before 10 o'clock, this huge hole appeared in the stage of the Tower Ballroom floor. And I can remember asking my dad, what's happening? Why is that hole there? He said, oh, you'll find out. And of course, a few minutes later, I do like to be beside the seaside, came out of the organ chambers and up came Reginald Dixon on the organ. And from that moment on I thought, this is absolutely fantastic. I've got to play this instrument.
One of the great things as a child went during my musical education was tuning in on a Friday evening, as it was then, to Friday Night is Music Night and the Organist Entertains on Radio 2, two of my favourite programmes of all time. So my, if you want, weekly dosage of cinema organ music was courtesy of Radio 2 and the Organist Entertains.
Well, these two certainly seem to have got it off to a fine art, as you're about to hear, in this arrangement of the famous Badineri from Orchestral Suite No. 2 by J.S. Bach.
One of the great things about the Organist Entertains is it really has moved with the times. In the early days of the programme, the originator Robin Richmond, of course, featured a lot of cinema organs and also the Hammond type organ. And then when Robin retired, Nigel Ogden took over as presenter, and Nigel, I think, brought it into the 21st century. We still have the sound of the mighty cinema organs, occasionally the sound of the jazz Hammond organ, the occasional electronic instrument, and indeed the cathedral organ now. So I think more of a broader spectrum of music is now featured on the Organist Entertains than at any time in its history.
Never miss a programme of the Organist Entertains. I heard Nigel's very first broadcast all those years ago, and almost every one I recorded originally.
Well, I like to hear all organ programmes. I used to go to the Tower Ballroom at Blackpool before the war, and I'm a member of my own organ society, and I've come here especially from Lincoln today to hear this concert.
I always listen to the Organist Entertains. I have done since I've been about 8, and my uncle got me into it, really. And then I've been coming here for about 10 years, and I'm 19, so most of my life, really.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, it may be the Comptons' 70th birthday this year, but as you know, it's also the 40th birthday of Radio 2 this year. So I thought we really ought to take a look back and see what songs were hitting top of the pops in that particular year. I mean, it might be a bit of a shock to discover that all these songs that I'm about to play to you are indeed 40 years old. I remember hearing them in my pram, of course. But I think they'll all be very, very familiar. So a few songs of 1967 coming up. Here we go. When I first started playing concerts in the early 70s, I was always very aware that in the audience there was a lot of fairly grey hair or silver hair or white hair or whatever. All these years later, I'm still aware that that's the case, but of course it's not the same grey hair. Those people sadly are no longer with us. But as the years have gone by, and certainly with the advent of being able to hear the programme over the internet and all over the world as well, a lot of response from younger listeners these days, and people who are learning to play themselves or people who just love the sound of the organs. I think the way we round off each edition of the Organist Entertains is really very much like I finish my concerts, really, leaving people wanting more.
Ladies and gentlemen,